right, Nikki, do you want to go over your any questions, or do you want to even discuss your homework? Because those questions were really interesting. Although
Exactly.
it might be interesting to wait until after the presentation, because a lot of the questions that you kind of pulled up are things that we're actually going to look at today with reference to the sun, for example, and the issues around. Let me just pull your. Or maybe I'll let you answer. I'll let you ask your question as it is, and then we'll answer, and then we'll show the screen later with the whole group, because I think there's a lot to learn in that in your chart. We can look at your
Okay.
chart as a group. But what are the questions you wanted to look at now? You can even sort of extrapolate from your homework.
Yeah. It was really great to just get the understanding of the great dispositor or the final dispositor. And I'm sure you're referring to understanding whether it's insect or out of sect.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We can talk about that whenever.
Okay.
What was more news to me in my chart, or what I'm still considering, is that because Mercury is found in the 12th house, and that places Mercury in fall and detriment, and Mercury is the
Wait, wait, wait,
ruler.
wait, wait. It's
Yeah.
not the house placement. That
Okay.
it's not, and this is crucial. It's the
Yeah.
sign where Mercury is found, right? So
Capricorn.
yeah, so Mercury is neither in fall nor in detriment in Capricorn. It's really important to understand that. And don't equate house per sign as having the same meaning. This is a real trap of modern astrology, that people assign the same meanings to the 12 houses. And we can't do that. So it's in Pisces that Mercury is in fall and detriment. And that is independent from the 12th house. You see?
So the Mercury in my chart is not in fall and detriment.
No, it's
Okay.
Capricorn.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy to hear
Well,
that.
yeah, but also, I mean, just to give you an example, even if it was, look at how you functioned all of your life up until this point. So basically, the point is that when we determine the quality of the planet, we look at the placement in the chart, and we'll look at that more today and then next week as well. Well, through the course basically. But the sign, because it's about the rulerships. You see, it's about the rulerships of the sign.
I
And
really understand. I don't know how I got mixed up, I
okay,
think, but I thought you were confirming that that was true. And then I was like, I got very confused. So I'm really glad. And I
nothing.
understand completely that
No,
what you're.
no, no, no. So we have to go through the whole chain of command. If you've got Mercury in Capricorn, we have to look for where Saturn is, and then who's ruling Saturn, and then
Right.
et cetera, until you get maybe to an ultimate dispositor. But sometimes there isn't one, so it just goes in a loop. It's just a chain of command that continues back to another planet, and then that planet becomes quite significant, because we're looking at something that has to integrate a whole stream of other energies before it can act. So it makes it more complicated. That's why when you have a planet in its own sign, it's quite strong, because it's a dispositor,
Right.
basically. Yeah. So when you have a planet that has to keep jiggling around between, let's say, in some cases up to 6 or 7 signs, you have to keep factoring in the influence of all of those other planets in different signs, none of whom are comfortable in their home, and some of whom might be in better dignity than others based on sign or house placement, based on their rulership or exaltation or whatever. And then we finally have to then interpret this planet that we're looking at. See, so yeah, don't the houses are a very separate thing. That's a separate issue. We haven't covered that actually yet, but it's an important thing eventually to layer up and integrate. So we
Thank
get,
you.
yeah,
Make
so it's great that
very.
you. It's a great point to raise. It's a really helpful thing to know, because I think some people might be confused about that idea.
I'm confused only by, at this point, I think it was a little bit of a mix up in the notes, but you mentioned that there could be a loss of a sibling or a cousin, referring to Gemini, but
So,
I don't understand
mm,
why. Like, is it
so
the
the
square?
12th house represents loss. The 12th, meaning the signification of the 12th house, regardless of sign, it represents loss or distancing or an absence of. It can be a loss of pregnancy. It can be a loss of an infant at birth. It can be an actual physical loss. We would have to then again trace the story of this Mercury. Mercury representing siblings, right? And that is in your natal chart, but as we're seeing throughout this course, this may be the story of one or another of your parents. And they were the ones that lost either this, perhaps your mother lost had a loss of a pregnancy or an infant before, or it can be an issue of sibling loss through the generations. You see?
Well, I've experienced estrangement from my sister. We were separated when I was 12.
Right. So that ties into that, but it's already a family pattern. It's before you're even born that this is showing up, you see? So that's your experience as you're carrying your energy of your chart forward. It's moving through you, but it is already happening before you're born. And so we want to understand that this is a bigger story that you've been born into, and that notion of loss of sibling, loss of child. It can also be an issue of identity. I don't know the identity. It could be a hidden sibling. Could be a sibling that was not acknowledged, like a family story of a child that was never acknowledged, for example, by the father. So, hi, I'm glad you could join us here. We're going to try and get back to our normal Zoom recording soon. See if anybody else is trying to get in. No, it's good. All right. We were just talking about the 12th house. We were just talking about the notion of loss through the 12th house. And Nikki was bringing up her chart because we were looking at it for homework. And there's a Mercury in Capricorn in the 12th house. Now, remind me, Nikki, where your Saturn is, because I think that's part of the story.
Saturn is in Scorpio in the 11th.
That's it. So Scorpio represents in the 11th house. It's the elder sibling, and it can also be uncle, or it can be somebody that is a dear friend as well, good friend. And that Saturn in there also is in the sign of Mars, which is Scorpio, which represents the death. It's the symbol of the death of something, or this crisis, or accidents, or all of the scorpionic issues, including mental illness and things that can come through psychological illness. And that is quite literally what's ruling that Mercury, and that's why I said that about the sibling issue. So it's important to understand both the condition of the planets, because we're looking at difficult conditions. We're looking at the two malefics, talking about the issue of sibling. And then in the 12th house, which is considered a difficult house, it's where things they disappear, they go away, they're not seen, and we can lose. And in some charts it might represent money. In some charts it will be more of a loss that is literal family loss, family member, or loss of reputation is another one. So there's different ways of experiencing that 12th house according to how how your chart is manifesting the rulerships, and that's why the rulerships are so significant, because we can really tell the story of that planet, and then therefore the experience of the individual. And Scorpio, even you mentioned mental illness, but it can be drug issues as well, psychiatric issues, crisis, accidents, often with Scorpio and Capricorn especially. But let's say in general, Mars and Saturn. Imagine if it's Mars, like Aries connection, it would be more like war kind of thing. Scorpio Mars is more like sudden death, or death from a challenge or a crisis, or some kind of shock, something that feels extremely deep and painful. When we have this, especially on the rising sign, when the ascendant is ruled by the Mars or Saturn, we can have this immense life story that carries a family pain. And it often can feel like, this doesn't belong to me. It's like, why is this so painful? This doesn't belong to me. But it can happen in certain ways in your life. But the story is actually inherited, because it's happening before you're born. It's happening, either before you're in utero or when you're in utero. There's something that recalls that pain. And especially when it's, the 12th house represents pregnancy as well. If you think of the wheel as going constantly around, we emerge in the first house, and we're born from the 12th house into the first house. but that also is where we disappear. So it's the house of, the beginnings, ending cycle between the first and the 12th house. In the same way as if you go across and you go to the 8th house, 7th house dynamic, it has a different quality of beginnings and endings as well, but it's still the same kind of vibe. And so we want to we'll see when we look next week at the axes of the chart, we're going to look at the stories of the midheaven and IC and the ascendant and descendant, and how that's the story that the parents are grappling with. That's the big topic. That is the sort of bigger conflict that the lineage is trying to process, and you come into that as an infant. You're born into that. And again, that becomes something that you can manifest throughout your life as stories that keep repeating those themes. And when that becomes conscious and you realize you're carrying this, not only in your own experience but your family experience, it starts to become really powerful. You can really heal a lot through that. I find that the depersonalization of these things, realizing that there's something going on in the family that is bigger than me, that is bigger than my lived experience, that I'm energetically holding, it offers up a kind of okay, this starts to make sense now, because there's often a self-reproach or self-blame or a judgment around how we're dealing with life or what is happening in our lives. That often is actually something we're being told to deal with by the ancestors. They couldn't cope, they couldn't deal, they didn't have the capacity. It still needs to be understood and digested through us. And some people can understand that lesson and move through it, and other people really struggle with that lesson, and it can become what appears to be a really hard life, but it often is what's been handed to them. See? So if we can expand that notion of working with the team, the ancestors are there working as a team, and they want us to succeed. They want us to figure this out. They don't want suffering to continue. And often we find when the planets are there in the 12th house that there's a real connection with ancestral stuff, ancestral loss, ancestral trauma, things that we're carrying. But it also means that they're there also with us, that there's something very present in our bond with the ancestors. So you can extrapolate that to your grandparents' stories, your great-grandparents' stories, uncles, aunts, and see who in the family keeps repeating this pattern. And we'll refine that as we go through the course. That's all the more powerful, for example, if the ruler of the ascendant, we'll cover this again, but all the more powerful when the ruler of the ascendant is in the 12th house. Okay, so that really adds to this incredible connection that the individual has with ancestral stuff, with ancestral healing.
But because the ruler is in Scorpio, which is maybe considered, I think, one of the houses, right?
So your ruler is in Scorpio in the 11th house, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's because of the rulership in Scorpio, or the fact that it's in Scorpio, is the challenge already. So the 11th house in and of itself is not a challenging house. It's what is called a karma house. It's one of the houses of the material world, of working through our enjoyment, working through temptation into pleasures, working with what is actual, what is real, what is here and now. It's not a bad house, it's just that it can be a distraction, let's say, from the overall, if you consider your overall life goal as evolving and attaining enlightenment, then it can be a distraction. Because it's part of the desire nature, right? The 3rd, the 7th, and the 11th are part of our desire nature. So we get distracted by all those mundane things, craving, coveting, wanting. But since it's Saturn there, that even becomes a challenge, and so sometimes that frustration around not having that ease in that house of gains, in the house of friends, in the house of connecting with society, that itself becomes almost like a frustration that takes you off the path or takes you away from yourself. Do you see? Now where's Mars now? That's the big question. So then we've got the Mercury, ruled by Saturn. That's the ascendant ruler in the 11th. Puts you, quite literally, physically you, as you represent yourself in life, going towards that 11th vision of the future, wanting something to transform through that scorpionic energy, wanting something more profound in my connections with friends, but finding that difficult because the Saturn distances things, can cause separation until you become the force of the sort of pillar of the community. You integrate with community by being the member of community that people look to, you see? And so still there's this kind of distancing. It's never intimate as you might crave, but it's there, and that's what you're there for. That's what you're doing, you see? Does that make sense? I saw your face kind of light up at that point.
Honestly, all of it, Susan, is very affirming. It's a little bit, it's complex. Obviously, this is my life we're talking about. So it's like you're definitely talking about things that are really relevant, really accurate, and really challenging. And I have come to understand that it isn't mine. There has been a sense of detachment from being super identified with the personal story. But there's also been a lot of frustration in just sort of watching it play out and not really feeling like I have any power to change the dynamics. But as you're explaining the dynamics more, just a lot of the things that have become clear to me, you're affirming that, yeah, I was right. And you're seeing it in my chart. I have found what you're saying in other ways to be true and found it through my chart. So you're just confirming.
Yeah. And then, so you want to understand when there's a sense I don't have the capacity, or I don't have the power, or I haven't found the tools, or whatever, and we're talking about the malefics, it's that you're not acknowledging your power, because the malefics are often, in our early experience of life, they feel heavy, or there's an individual person that feels that they're suffocating us, or they're heavy, or there's some obstacle, or there's some disconnection that feels like it's coming from another individual, and it will be often the case, like a teacher, a sibling, a parent, or whatever, or financial impediment, depending on where the impediment is. But it's actually where we're not internalizing the Saturn or Mars. We're not working through it and owning it, and then we get to find that place of, this is how I get my power, this is where I go to where I want to go. And with Saturn, we're always looking at notions of integrity and strength, and being solidly involved in something, especially with the Saturn in Mars ruled sign. It's taking responsibility. That's quite a strong word. But you draw the barrier, you draw the line, you decide, this is my responsibility, this is not my responsibility. And that's the gift of Saturn. And the intensity of Mars behind that in a scorpionic sign is the understanding the reality, like life is hard. Sometimes I need to jump in, sometimes I need to back off. And sometimes it's tough love, and sometimes it's taking responsibility. And that is where, then of course, then Mars is the reference. So where's your Mars?
Libra in the 10th.
So there we found your problem. The issue, I'm going to call it a problem, but the issue is the ambivalence around jumping in. It's the not fully owning your power, although Mars in the 10th is very strong because it's in the 10th, and we'll talk about that again as we go through. But the dynamic of Libra weakens Mars, because there's always this feeling of, but what if, and am I too much, or I need to make all of this feel better. I need to make all of this look better. I need, especially in the 10th house, I need for all of this to be to appear in a particular way, and it starts to deplete that Mars, and so that actually is the issue. Now we have to find Venus. Where's your Venus?
She's South Node, and she's in the South Node in the 12th? No, 11th, right?
Was it Venus is in Scorpio?
No, she's in Sagittarius on the stellium on the South Node. Uranus, Venus. I have to pull up my chart.
Yeah, if you can, I think in whole sign charts, can we? Is that whole sign, or is that in Placidus?
For whole sign, that's why I don't remember it, because because the whole sign.
Is the 12th. That puts Sagittarius in the 11th. That puts Scorpio in the 10th, and it puts Libra in the 9th.
Sorry, that's the old way. That's not whole sign.
What's the old way? I am. Oh, there's Vivian. There we go. And we've got everybody coming in. That's great. Hi there. The gang who's just hold on for a second, Nikki. We'll pick back up on that. And while you're looking for your chart, that would be great. And then I just wanted to hear from Noreen or Viviana. Did you finish up? Is that session all finished now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I prefer to move over to Zoom, where we have our comfort zone, and we'll just end this meeting here. And then I just invite you to go back to our usual, our scheduled programming on Zoom. Okay, so at our normal link, not at the link that was specially for Roisin, but the normal group link. Okay, we'll go back there, and I will just let Peter know that we're doing that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so Peter, you've just joined in from Roisin's group, and we're just about to leave and go back to our regular Zoom meeting. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Susan.
Excellent. Okay, see you there.